Christmas Eve came to the frontier the way it always did, quiet, cold, and unforgiving. Snow drifted down in thin, tired sheets, catching the yellow glow of lanterns strung along the main street. Somewhere inside the saloon, a cracked piano fought its way through a hymn, the notes bending under laughter and whiskey. Voices carried cheer they didn't quite believe in. The wind took the rest and scattered it into the dark. Behind the shops, behind the cheer, the alley lay forgotten. It was narrow and choked with shadows, hemmed in by brick and warped timber. Refuse froze where it fell. The snow there wasn't clean, it was gray, trampled, mixed with mud and ash. And near the far wall, half buried beneath it, a body lay still. She didn't scream. She didn't move. The cold had taken that from her already. A lone cowboy passed the mouth of the alley, coat pulled tight, hat brim low against the wind. He wasn't headed anywhere special. Just walking off another year that had taken more than it gave. Then he stopped. Something shifted. Barely a sound. Just enough to catch a man who'd learned to listen for trouble instead of music. He turned back. The alley breathed out cold like a grave. He stepped in, boots crunching, the hymn fading behind him. That's when he saw her. Curled in on herself, dressed thin as paper, hands bare and blue. Snow clung to her hair like a shroud. Her eyes were open, unfocused, staring past the brick as if already gone somewhere warmer. He crouched slow. Careful. She tried to speak. Nothing came out. Hey, he said. One word. Rough. Unused. Her chest hitched. Frost rimmed her lashes. Whoever she'd been before, the town had decided she wasn't worth saving. On Christmas Eve of all nights, they'd let her slip into the cold and called it fate. The cowboy looked back toward the street. Toward the light. Toward the warmth that hadn't reached this far. He could leave her. No one would blame him. No one would even ask. Instead, he shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shaking shoulders. His jaw tightened, anger cutting through the cold. Get up, he growled, voice low and final. Her eyes flickered. You're coming home. And just like that, on the loneliest night of the year, the frontier held its breath, because Mercy had just stepped into the snow, and nothing would be the same after. The cabin stood alone beyond the town's glow, half buried in snow, smoke lifting slow from the chimney like a tired sigh. The cowboy pushed the door open with his shoulder, the hinges groaning in protest, and guided her inside as if she might shatter if he moved too fast. Heat rushed out to meet them, sharp and alive, stinging skin numbed by the cold. He sat her near the hearth and fed the fire until it caught strong. The flames painted the walls in restless light, revealing a place shaped by solitude, one table, two chairs, a narrow bed, and the weight of memories pressed into every corner. She hovered at the edge of the warmth, hands trembling, boots still on, eyes darting to the door, the window, the rifle mounted above the mantel. Drink, he said, setting a tin cup in her hands. His voice was low. Careful. She took it but didn't drink right away. Trust didn't come easy to someone who'd been left to die. Her fingers were cracked, bleeding in places. Old injuries. New ones too. She noticed him noticing and pulled her coat tighter, even as the heat returned, painful and slow. Silence filled the space between them. Not comfortable. Watchful. You ain't gonna make me owe you? She asked finally, staring into the fire. He shook his head once. Ain't how this works. She gave a brittle laugh. That's what they all say. The words lingered. He turned away, busying himself with the kettle, anything to keep from answering the things she hadn't said out loud. He didn't trust his own instincts either. Christmas Eve or not, Mercy had a way of opening doors best left closed. He knew that better than most. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the shutters, piling snow against the walls. The storm was settling in, thick and final. Whatever choice he'd made in that alley, there was no undoing it now. She sipped the drink at last, wincing as feeling crept back into her limbs. The fire crackled. Shadows shifted. Just for the night, she said, more promise than request. He nodded. Just the night. They kept their distance, bound together by heat, by weather, by a world that had already decided neither of them mattered much. The storm howled louder, sealing the cabin shut. And beneath that roof, uneasy and awake, they waited for morning, each wondering which was more dangerous, the cold outside or the choice that had brought them in. The night stretched long and heavy, The kind of winter night that pressed against the walls and dared the fire to die. Outside, snow whispered against the cabin like restless spirits. Inside, the woman lay wrapped in blankets near the hearth, the color slowly returning to her cheeks as warmth fought its way back into her bones. The cowboy sat a few paces away, hat resting on his knee, eyes fixed on the flames as if they held answers he'd long stopped asking. Silence ruled at first. Not the easy kind, but the cautious kind. The kind shaped by lives where words had been used as weapons. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, brittle. "I didn't plan on ending up there," she said. "In that alley." She paused, swallowing. "No one ever does." The fire popped. The cowboy didn't interrupt. He had learned long ago that truth came easier when it wasn't chased. Her story came in pieces. A sickness that took her strength and her work. Bills she couldn't pay. Doors that stopped opening. Friends who stopped seeing her. Each loss pushed her closer to the edges of town, until the alley was all that remained. "They said I was drunk," she muttered bitterly. "Easier that way. Easier than admitting they let me rot." She didn't say who they were. But the word hung heavy, carrying more weight than a name ever could. The cowboy's jaw tightened. He remembered those looks. The ones that measured worth quick and cold. He remembered Christmases past. Laughter once filling this same cabin. Boots by the door that no longer stood there. His wife's scarf still hung on a peg by habit alone. She died years back, taken sudden and unfair, leaving behind a silence he never learned to outdraw. That was when he'd stopped going into town. Stopped believing warmth could last. "You ever have someone who made the cold bearable?" he asked quietly. She nodded once. "Lost him to fever." Her hands clenched in the blanket. "After that, people don't see you the same." Morning crept in pale and slow, light slipping through frost-laced windows. They shared coffee without ceremony. Something had shifted, not trust, not yet, but recognition. Two souls shaped by neglect more than malice. As the day wore on, she mentioned a detail she hadn't before. How the barkeep hadn't called for help. How a town man had stepped over her like she was already dead. The cowboy's eyes hardened then. He knew that kind of cruelty. The quiet kind. The kind backed by influence and indifference. This wasn't just bad luck. Someone had decided she didn't matter. And out here on the frontier, that decision was often deadlier than a bullet. The knock came late the next morning, hard enough to rattle the door frame. Not hurried. Not afraid. The kind of knock that expected to be answered. The cowboy didn't reach for his rifle right away. He stood still, listening to the wind scrape snow along the boards, listening for the second sound beneath the knock, the confidence of men who believed the cold would finish what they started. When he opened the door, two figures stood on the porch, collars turned up, boots clean despite the slush. Townmen. Not law exactly. Not friends either. Their smiles were thin, practiced. Behind them, the street lay quiet, as if the town itself were holding its breath. "Morning," one said, eyes already drifting past the cowboy's shoulder. "We heard there was a disturbance last night. Woman found in an alley. Supposed to have passed." The word supposed hung there, sharp as ice. The cowboy blocked the doorway with his body. "You heard wrong." The other man's gaze hardened. "Some folks don't have a place here. Winter cleans them out. That's just how it is." He spoke gently, like explaining a rule to a child. Bringing her inside disrupts things. Inside the cabin, the woman stood frozen, wrapped in a blanket that wasn't hers. She understood then. It wasn't concern that brought them. It was correction. She had survived when she wasn't meant to. And survival in a town built on quiet cruelty was an offense. "She's weak," the first man continued. "Confused. Best if she's returned. Where she was found. Returned. Not helped. Not seen." The woman took a step back, heart pounding. She'd known this moment would come. The cold didn't just live in the alley. It lived in people who decided who mattered and who didn't. She looked at the cowboy, already preparing herself for the door to open wider, for the shove back into the storm. It didn't happen. He stepped forward instead, boots firm on the boards. "She's staying." The words were calm. Final. Silence followed, brittle and dangerous. The men exchanged a look, surprised, then something sharper. The first smile vanished. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The cowboy met their eyes unblinking. Then I reckon you best get used to hard. When the door closed again, the wind rushed in to fill the space they left behind. The woman let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Outside, footsteps retreated into the snow. Inside, something else settled. The line had been crossed. The wind found every weakness in the cabin and worried it like a bone. Snow pressed against the windows in hissing sheets, and the boards answered with tired creaks. The cowboy moved through it all with practiced calm, as if the storm were just another adversary he'd faced before. He slid the iron bolt home on the door. Once, then again. He tested it with his shoulder. Solid. He checked the rifles next, slow, deliberate, the ritual as steady as a heartbeat. Oilcloth click. Each sound felt too loud in the tight room. He counted cartridges and set them where a hand could find them in the dark. The windows came next. Planks measured, nailed, leaving narrow slits for sight and smoke. Wind shoved at the cabin harder now. He shoved back. She watched at first from the table, wrapped in a blanket that swallowed her whole. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the cold still leaving her bones. When she stood, he noticed at once. "You should sit," he said, not unkindly. She shook her head. "I won't." He hesitated, then nodded once and handed her a hammer. She took it with both hands, set a nail and struck, awkward then truer. Each blow carried a quiet defiance. She fetched boards. She held the lantern. She kept moving. Weakness did not stop resolve. It only taught it to be careful. They worked without speeches. Trust didn't need words. It grew in the space between breaths, in the way he didn't take the hammer back, in the way she didn't drop it. He showed her where to stand if shots came through the walls, where the floor dipped just enough to catch a foot. She memorized it all. Outside, the storm worsened. Snow thickened. The night pressed closer as if listening. The cowboy stepped out once to drag a sled against the door for weight, his coat snapping in the wind. When he came back in, his beard was white, his eyes steady. They shared a pot of coffee gone bitter on the stove. He set a knife on the table between them, handle toward her. Not a bargain. A choice. "What would you have done?" he asked quietly, as if asking the fire. She looked at the door. The windows. The walls that now held because they had made them hold. "Stayed," she said. The wind held its answer. Snow buried the tracks outside, erasing the world down to this one place. Inside, lantern light steadied. Two figures stood ready, not rescuer and rescued anymore, but partners holding a line through the longest night of the year. Christmas morning came wrapped in silence. The storm had eased sometime before dawn, leaving the world smothered beneath fresh snow. It lay smooth and untouched around the cabin, glowing faintly under a pale winter sky. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing soft light across the room. For a moment, just a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then the horses came. The sound reached the cabin like a distant drumbeat, hooves crunching through snow, slow and deliberate. Not rushing. Never rushing. Men who came with urgency came sloppy. These men came certain. The cowboy rose from his chair and went to the window. Frost clung to the glass. Beyond it, dark shapes moved through the white. 3 riders. Then more spreading out, cutting off the trees, the creek, the long road back to town. Behind him, the woman stirred. She knew that sound now. Her breath caught. "They found me," she whispered. The cowboy didn't turn. He slid a rifle from the rack and worked the lever once, clean and final. "They didn't find you," he said. "They brought trouble to the wrong door." A knock came, not polite, not loud. A gloved fist against wood. A warning more than a request. "Morning," a voice called. "Christmas Day. No need for blood." The cowboy stepped into the open room, standing where they could see his shadow through the frosted pane. Then turn around. A pause. Then a chuckle. "You know why we're here. She don't belong to you." The woman's hand shook as she pulled on her coat. She moved closer to the cowboy, not hiding, standing. He felt it and nodded once, barely. "She belongs where she stands," he said. The voice outside hardened. "Last chance." The first shot shattered the window. Wood exploded inward. Glass sprang across the floor. The cowboy fired back instantly, the rifle's crack ripping through the quiet morning. One of the riders screamed. A horse reared and bolted, dragging chaos with it. The siege was on. Gunfire echoed off the trees, sharp and unforgiving. Smoke filled the cabin as the cowboy moved from window to window, firing only when he had a shot worth taking. Outside, bullets tore into the walls, thudding into logs inches from where they stood. Snow kicked up in frantic bursts, stained dark where men fell. The woman dropped to the floor, reloading as he'd shown her, hands steadier now than they had any right to be. Each movement was deliberate, focused. Fear sharpened into resolve. "They're circling," she said. "I know." A second window burst. Cold air flooded in, stealing the warmth, carrying the smell of powder and pine. The cowboy felt the old ache rise in his chest, the memory of standing helpless once before, of losing someone while the world burned around him. Not again. The attackers pressed closer, using the trees, the drifted snowbanks. One rushed the door. The cowboy fired through the wood. The body hit the porch hard and didn't move. Silence fell again. Brief. Heavy. "Listen to me." The voice called out once more, strained now. "This ain't your fight. She's trouble. Always was. You'll die for nothing." The woman stood. Walked forward into the light of the broken window. Snow swirled around her boots. "No," she said, her voice carrying clean and clear. "I was trouble because you needed me silent." The men outside froze. She spoke louder. Of the alley. Of the sickness. Of being turned away while they watched and waited for the cold to finish the work. Her words cut sharper than any bullet. Truth always did. "You left me to die," she said. "And you were wrong." A gun fired toward her. The cowboy moved without thinking, pulling her down as the shot tore through the wall above them. He came up firing, rage and fear braided tight. 2 more riders went down. The rest broke, scrambling for cover, their certainty finally cracking. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. Snow fell again, light and slow, settling over spent shells and fallen men alike. When it was over, the woods were empty. The cowboy stood in the doorway, breath fogging the air, rifle smoking in his hands. The woman stepped beside him, leaning into his shoulder. Neither spoke. Christmas morning stretched before them, scarred, quiet, real. Mercy had invited war. And somehow they were still standing. The gun smoke thinned first. Then the shouting. What remained was the sound of the wind moving again, slow and cautious, as if the land itself were checking to see if it was safe. The men who had come to finish what the cold started were gone, driven off, broken in will if not in body. The threat had ended the only way it ever did out here, by someone refusing to step aside. The cabin stood scarred but breathing. A shattered window patched with a blanket. Boot marks tracked through melted snow and blood-dark slush near the porch. Yet the door still hung on its hinges. The fire still burned. That cabin had not been a bargain. It had been a stand. Morning came quietly. Christmas Day rose without ceremony, pale light slipping over the hills as the storm finally loosened its grip. Snow eased into a gentle fall, then stopped altogether. The world looked rinsed clean, soft, fragile, and new. Smoke curled from the chimney like a promise kept. Inside, the woman sat wrapped in a blanket, color back in her cheeks, hands steady now. She was no longer a shape abandoned in an alley, no longer invisible. She had a place by the fire, a cup warming her palms, a name spoken without contempt. The cowboy stood at the window, watching dawn break over land he'd long believed held nothing for him but memory and regret. He hadn't saved the world. He hadn't fixed the frontier. He had saved one life. And somehow that had been enough. Redemption didn't arrive with hymns or bells. Came with breath drawn easy, with light through frost-cracked glass, with the quiet understanding that on this Christmas, when the world expected nothing from him, he chose mercy. And mercy chose him back. Out here, the frontier never paused for holidays. Snow fell the same. Hunger waited the same. And mercy, especially mercy, still carried a price. Christmas Eve only sharpened the question the land always asked. Would you look away? Or would you kneel down in the cold and choose another human being? That night, hope didn't arrive with bells or ribbons. It arrived with a rough voice and a hard choice. A woman was dying in an alley because the world had decided she was invisible. A cowboy changed that, not with speeches, not with promises, but with action. He opened a door when it would have been easier to keep it shut. So I ask you, as the fire settles and the storm thins, what would you have done? When compassion meant inconvenience, When mercy invited danger, would you have walked on or said, "Get up. You're coming home"? If this Christmas tale stayed with you, leave your thoughts below like footprints in fresh snow. And if you wish to keep these frontier stories alive, stories of justice, mercy, and hard-won hope, then subscribe and ride with us again. The cabin glows warm now. The wind loosens its grip. And somewhere between firelight and falling snow, a future, once nearly lost, is quietly reborn.